Since the dawn of time, humanity has wrestled with a haunting question. Why do some people seem to carry an invisible burden, a mark that sets them apart from the rest of society? This question echoes through one of the oldest and most enigmatic stories in the Bible, the story of Cain and Abel. Cain, the first murderer, was cursed, yet he was also given a unique mark by God. But what was this mark? Was it punishment or was it protection? And most importantly, what does this story teach us about divine justice and mercy in our modern world? Now, imagine yourself in Cain's shoes, bearing a mark visible to everyone around you. How would people treat you? Would they reject you, fear you, or perhaps shield you? Today, many of us carry invisible marks, past mistakes, society's judgment, or the weight of prejudice. Cain's story might seem distant, but it holds profound truths about our relationship with God, with others, and even with ourselves. Get ready to dive into a mystery that will challenge everything you think about guilt, redemption, and God's plan for humanity. The answer to the riddle of Cain's mark could transform your understanding of justice and mercy forever. Are you ready to uncover the truth? To truly understand the significance of the mark of Cain, we need to go back to where it all began. Genesis 4:1-16. Cain and Abel, the first sons of Adam and Eve, are pivotal figures in the Bible's narrative of human history. Abel, a shepherd, offered the best of his flock to God, while Cain, a farmer, brought an offering of fruit. The Bible tells us that God looked with favor on Abel's sacrifice, but not on Cain's. This rejection ignited a spark of jealousy and rage in Cain's heart, leading to an act that would forever alter humanity's story. Consumed by envy and anger, Cain lured his brother into the field and committed the unthinkable, the first murder. Abel's blood cried out from the ground, and with it came the irreversible consequence of sin's grip on the human heart. This was not just the killing of a brother, it was the introduction of violence, guilt, and estrangement into a world that had already tasted the bitterness of disobedience in Eden. When confronted by God, Cain uttered the now famous words, "Am I my brother's keeper?" A question that echoes through time, forcing us to examine our own responsibility toward others. God, in his justice, cursed Cain, declaring that the ground would no longer yield its strength to him and that he would become a restless wanderer. Yet, even in the midst of judgment, God extended mercy. He placed a mark on Cain, a sign that no one should harm him or they would face sevenfold vengeance. This dual response, justice and mercy intertwined, sets the stage for one of the Bible's most complex lessons. Through Cain's punishment and protection, we see the tension between human accountability and divine grace. But what does this mean for us today? To answer that, we must first unravel the mystery of the mark itself. The Mark of Cain has puzzled scholars, theologians, and believers for centuries. What exactly was this mark that God placed upon Cain? Was it a visible, physical sign, or something deeper, something spiritual, intangible, yet profoundly significant? The Bible provides no detailed description of the mark, leaving room for countless interpretations and debates throughout history. Many traditional interpretations suggest the mark was physical, a scar, a tattoo, or even a unique physical characteristic that distinguished Cain from others. This view aligns with the idea that the mark served as a warning, visible to anyone who might think of harming him. In this interpretation, the mark was both a symbol of God's justice and a shield of his mercy, ensuring that Cain would not face additional violence despite his guilt. Others, however, believe the mark was not physical at all, but rather a spiritual or symbolic sign. This perspective sees the mark as representing a deeper reality, perhaps Cain's alienation from God, his guilt, or the divine protection that accompanied his punishment. In this view, the mark might not have been something others could see, but was instead a spiritual truth that God made known. Over the centuries, interpretations of the mark have also been shaped by cultural and theological perspectives. Some early Jewish writings speculated that the mark was a form of divine inscription, while others suggested it was an animal that accompanied Cain as a perpetual reminder of his crime. In Christian theology, the mark has often been seen as a foreshadowing of both judgment and redemption, a pattern repeated throughout the Bible. However, the mark has also been misinterpreted and misused, sometimes to justify harmful ideologies. Such distortions remind us of the importance of approaching this story with humility and discernment, seeking its deeper lessons rather than focusing on speculative details. Ultimately, the Mark of Cain was more than just a sign. It was a profound statement about the nature of God's justice and mercy. But how does this ancient story resonate with us today? To understand that, we must explore the broader meaning of the mark and its implications for our lives. The Mark of Cain represents one of the Bible's most profound expressions of divine duality, the interplay between justice and mercy. In Genesis, we see God confronting Cain with the full weight of his actions. His sin, murdering his own brother, was a grievous offense, not only against Abel but against the divine order itself. Justice demanded consequences, and God delivered them. Cain was cursed to wander the earth, the ground refusing to yield its strength to him. This punishment reflected the severity of his crime, a stark reminder that sin carries a heavy price. But even in the midst of judgment, God extended mercy. The mark was not merely a sign of Cain's guilt, it was also a shield of protection. God declared that anyone who harmed Cain would face vengeance sevenfold. This act reveals an extraordinary truth about God's character. Even when he administers justice, his mercy remains. Cain was not beyond the reach of divine care, despite his transgression. The mark served as a paradoxical emblem, both a reminder of Cain's wrongdoing and a testament to God's unwillingness to abandon him entirely. Reflecting on Cain's humanity brings this duality into sharper focus. Cain was not a monster. He was a human being driven by jealousy, anger, and despair, emotions that we too experience. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves. How often do we let anger or resentment cloud our judgment? How frequently do we fail to see the humanity in those we condemn? Cain's mark reminds us that even the worst among us are not beyond God's mercy. Furthermore, the mark challenges us to think about forgiveness and redemption. While Cain bore the weight of his actions, he was also given the opportunity to live, to continue his journey, and perhaps to find reconciliation with God. This echoes the broader biblical theme that no one is beyond redemption. The mark then becomes a symbol of hope, that even in our darkest moments, God's grace can still reach us. In today's world, where judgment often overshadows mercy, the Mark of Cain offers a powerful lesson. It calls us to reflect on how we view justice, how we extend forgiveness, and how we embody the balance of accountability and compassion in our own lives. But what does this ancient story mean for our modern context? Let's explore its relevance in today's world. The story of Cain and the mark he bore might feel like an ancient tale, far removed from our modern lives. But in reality, it holds a mirror to our society today. We live in a world where people often carry invisible marks, labels imposed by their past, their mistakes, or even the judgments of others. These marks, though unseen, shape how they are perceived and treated. The Mark of Cain challenges us to confront these prejudices and reconsider how we judge those around us. Think about it. How often do we define people by their worst moments? A criminal record, a failure, a mistake made in anger. These can become a permanent mark in the eyes of society. Just as Cain was marked after his transgression, many carry labels that make them outcasts. But the Bible's account reveals a divine perspective that transcends human judgment. God marked Cain not only to acknowledge his guilt, but also to protect him. This duality reminds us that justice must be tempered with mercy, and that every person, no matter how flawed, is still within the reach of redemption. In our modern context, the Mark of Cain invites us to reflect on how we treat those we consider marked. Do we extend compassion to those who have fallen, or do we cast them aside, leaving them to wander as social outcasts? Whether it's someone struggling with addiction, a person returning from prison, or even someone bearing the scars of deep personal failure, the story of Cain challenges us to see their humanity. Moreover, the story addresses our own tendencies to judge. It reminds us of the words of Jesus in the New Testament, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." We are quick to label others, often forgetting our own imperfections. The Mark of Cain calls us to pause, reflect, and approach others with the same mercy that God extended to Cain. This ancient narrative also speaks to the systemic marks in our world, issues like prejudice and discrimination. Many are burdened by marks they never chose, their ethnicity, social class, or circumstances of birth. The story of Cain teaches us that God's justice and mercy extend to all, urging us to build a society where labels and marks no longer define a person's worth. In the end, the relevance of the Mark of Cain lies in its timeless message. We are all flawed, yet none of us are beyond God's mercy. It challenges us to embody this divine balance in our own lives, offering justice where it's needed, but always with a heart of compassion. As we conclude, the story of Cain and his mark leaves us with a powerful truth. Even in our darkest moments, God's justice and mercy walk hand in hand. Cain's sin was great, yet God's mercy still gave him protection. This story is not just ancient history, it's a reminder that no matter the marks we carry, we are never beyond God's reach. But what about you? Do you carry a mark of guilt, judgment, or rejection? How does it shape your life, your relationships, and your faith? Or perhaps you've been too quick to judge others, labeling them based on their mistakes. Cain's story challenges us to look beyond the surface and extend mercy, just as God did for Cain. Take a moment to reflect. How will this story change the way you treat others? How will it shape the way you see yourself? The Mark of Cain isn't just a lesson from the past, it's a challenge for how we live today. Let's carry forward a legacy of mercy and grace, not judgment. If you found meaning in this message, subscribe for more reflections and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue this journey of reflection together.